Hi, this is Tim of the 1916 Company. Welcome and thanks for logging on. If you love this watch, email us tmosso at the1916company.com for purchase pricing and availability questions concerning this watch. And I'm happy to announce the channel debut of the Patek Philippe Nautilus. This is the 5811 1G-001. We've had many prior versions of the Nautilus, but this one right here is the current generation of the so-called jumbo or core model. It's the successor to the 5711, which was itself the successor to the 3711 and the 3700. So this is the direct descendant of Gerald Genta's 1976 original. Only available in white gold to date, as you see here. It is bigger in some regards, actually smaller in others. So let's talk about the dimensions of the latest Nautilus Jumbo. So it's 41 millimeters in diameter. That's compared to the 5711's 40. In terms of thickness, with the return of the two-piece or monoblock case, I'll explain that in a moment, it's actually gotten a little bit thinner than the 5711. 5711 was 8.6 millimeters. I measure this at 8.4. The 5711 was 44.5 millimeters lug-to-lug, if we just measured the case. And then this is actually a little bit bigger at 45.4 lug-to-lug. I'll also mention that if you measure from the first link on each side, the total rigid distance across the wrist is a beefier 49.5. So like a lot of integrated bracelet sports watches, this was a little bit bigger than its rated size. Consider it as more of a 42 millimeter round watch equivalent than a true 41. Now, all in gold, it's a pretty massive thing. You feel it. It's special on the wrist. It doesn't declare itself as precious metal because that's just sort of the nature of gray gold. But my goodness, does it have some heft to it. You can see it is flat. It's flush. It'll easily slide underneath the cuff. So if you want to wear this as a dress watch, game on. From over the top, which always exaggerates the width of a watch, you can see that the lugs are still far inboard of the edge of my wrist. So I'd consider this viable for a wrist down to 14 centimeters circumference. Really no reason not to. And you can see that the lugs, when viewed down the barrel, which is the truest angle, at least to the wearer's eye, this fits quite well. The bracelet feels robust. It feels quite thin. I don't believe any dimensional bloat was added to this bracelet. If anything, given that it is precious metal, it does feel a little bit more flexible, light, and pliant in the hand. There's something about it that is immensely pleasing, almost like it's a piece of delicate fabric rather than links of metal. And you can see on the underside how it's been put together through the years. Actually, there are little bars inserted that go through the primary links, lock them to the intermediate links. It's then burnished along its side to remove the visible evidence of the bars that are inserted to join these links together. Now, of course, we still have pins and sleeves that are used to fix the removable links, of which there are many. Patek's rationale is that pin sleeves cannot be stripped out, and thus you cannot wind up with a stranded link like you can with screws. Well, whether you believe that pin sleeves are the best choices or not, it is unarguable that you cannot wind up with a stranded link because of a stripped pin sleeve. You simply hammer them out. You'll need a block and a punch if you want to size this at home, but once you do, it's a very secure system. One of the big changes, though, with the 5811 is this move to a new clasp design. You can see twin trigger release. We have these little partial Calatrava cross motifs inside. It's all gray gold. And I should mention, what is gray gold? I used that phrase before. It is an 18-karat white alloy that is white gold all the way through, so it's not plated with rhodium on the top. It's the same color straight through, so it never needs to be plated, and if you scratch it, it's the same color underneath. Big change here. We now have a micro adjust, trigger actuated, built into each side of the clasp, and you can see that, so you can deploy one or both depending on your desire to size this down. Twin trigger release. We're bidding farewell to the old clamshell lock system. This feels a lot more upscale. You can see externally the unified Calatrava cross logo, which is also on the crown and on the rotor. It's the logo of Patek Philippe. I mentioned monoblock case construction, and I don't mean that it's a one-piece case. What I mean is that we have the structure with the bezel and the wings on the top, and it combines with the case back and mid case to create the water-resistant structure. This is how Gerald Genta originally patented his Nautilus design in the 70s. What happens here is that we've got a sapphire that's been pressed into a display case-back aperture with just enough tension to hold the sapphire in place and achieve water resistance. If you look at the seam of where this case-back structure meets the physical case of the watch, there is no break between those two metal surfaces. It's seamless. It's one piece. And this helps to make the watch thinner. One of the reasons why, though a bigger watch, it's thinner than the 5711. It also restores one of the elements that was lost in the transition from 3711 to 5711, something that was long lamented, the move to a three-piece case. A lot of people thought that was a step backwards in terms of quality and historical fidelity. So the Sterns have taken another look at this and restored the monoblock case, whereby the case back and the mid case are one piece. Part of that was enabled by the use of a new split stem. So it's a front loader, everything loads through the front. It's a split stem that can then be assembled once the dial and the movement are inserted. It is still a screw-down crown, and though this watch debuted with a 120-meter water resistance rating, Patek now rates all of its watches as a true 30 meters water resistant, which of course means almost 100 feet if you're in the old colonies like myself, farther than anyone would ever probe while diving in an amateur capacity. But the reality is, though they are all 30, this watch remains substantively more water resistant than the others. Taking a look at the finish, it's beautifully done. You can see that little artful bevel of the lug continuing down the shoulders of the links. Finishing this bracelet, particularly with the flanking bevel and the tapering profiles, not an easy thing to do. The tolerances are so tight that if you apply pressure laterally and run your finger down these links, you don't feel a whole lot of steps between them. It is almost completely seamless. Run your finger up while compressing the links, and you cannot feel the steps between the links. We also have the intermediates in polish, the top links in satin. The case of the Nautilus has always been more complex to assemble and finish than the Aquanaut. That's why even when the Aquanaut is equipped with a full bracelet, the prices are not equivalent from model to model. The Nautilus just has so many more little details, like this break from the satin finish of the winglet to the step of the bezel, the polish of the bezel, and then the satin finish on the top. I've long opined that the Nautilus seems like a more thoroughly realized Gerald Genta design than the Royal Oak, because with the Royal Oak you had that distinctive rounded octagonal bezel, but the inner bezel, crystal, and dial were all round, whereas here, outer bezel, inner bezel, crystal, and dial, they're all the same shape. Some changes dial side, the most obvious being the color. It's a more saturated sort of cobalt metallic blue than the flat slate metallic blue you see on a conventional, say, 5711. The dial does feature white gold hands and indices, so they'll never tarnish or oxidize, but a big change occurs over at the date window, where rather than a sheer cut through the dial, we now have this lovely polished white gold aperture that gives it a more upscale look. And that is probably my favorite aesthetic change, though I do like the new blue. So it's 1 millimeter larger, it's got a new clasp with micro adjustments, it's got a dial color that's changed, a frame for the date, overall different case dimensions, a case that's now a monoblock. One thing that hasn't changed, although it was commonly reported when this model came out, a lot of people thought that the addition of the 26-330 hacking movement was for this model, and for this model first and foremost. That's not true. It actually started rolling out in the Nautilus catalog back in 2019. So this movement can be found in a 5711, but all 5811s have hacking calibers. I'll demonstrate that now. And you can see the lateral striations that have been a part of the Nautilus dial since the arrival of the 3700 back in the 70s. Now, unhack right there. You can see that we've got a quick set as well for the date, so you can rapidly cycle if the watch runs down. Okay, so that's what you do if the watch runs down. You reset the date, rewind, and set the time. But what if it's dark? Not a problem. This watch has plenty of luminescence. And while there are detailed changes to the hands and indices, they are difficult to register if you are not holding a 5711 side by side. Around back, we already saw a little bit of this earlier, but the movement is still in the tradition of the 324, a center rotor automatic, unidirectional windings, ceramic bearings, 45-hour power reserve, 4 Hz beat rate, quick set date, hacking seconds, Gyromax style free sprung balance with Patek Philippe's at least 3rd generation silicone hairspring. And that means not only is it highly resistant to thermal drift as temperatures change and almost immune to magnetism in all regards, but it also has more of an isochronic operation as it is radially symmetrical in terms of mass with deep reactive ion etching. Patek has created a flat hairspring and silicone that breathes like an overcoil. So here we have 6-position adjustment, one more than a standard chronometer, which I always like to shout out because a 6-position adjustment is really exhaustive. 30 pivot jewels and a movement that is a combination of hand finish and mechanical finish, if we're honest. But Patek does a better job than, say, JLC, Audemars Piguet, and FP Journe of selling the final pass with the hand, particularly where the bevels are concerned, to make them look mirrored and artisanal rather than rough cut by a machine. So I highly appreciate that attention to detail. We have circular stripes on the rotor, linear stripes on the bridges, polished screw heads with chamfered slots in circumference. We have beautiful mirrored bevels as well as bevels for the jewel and screw sinks. And then finally, you can see some of these locating pegs that are used to locate bridges on the base plate. Those pegs are actually polished on their top. There's engine turning on the center of the rotor as well as on the base plate. All in all, it's turned out quite nicely for a series production movement. And again, a 45-hour power reserve. If you love this watch, reach out to Team Mosso at the 1916company.com for purchase and pricing details.